Welcome to Psychologist Talks. On today's episode, I've kind of sarcastically, playfully termed this a workshop on shitty leadership and what not to do as a leader. And you might ask yourself, well, what is that workshop going to be about? Here we go. Now, you might roll your eyes. Perhaps you're left-leaning or centric, and you're like, oh gosh, not more of this. Or perhaps you're far right-leaning, and oh, here we go, a political thing. But stick with me. I'm going to take this from truly just analyzing from a leadership lens, and I will give analogs that have nothing to do with politics. And my hope is if you're a leader, this should hopefully be evident. If it is not evident and you think this guy and these two guys are wonderful leaders, I will hopefully try to sway you at least saying, nah, they're making pretty poor choices and they're indicative of like a certain style of leadership. Or if you're a layperson, heaven forbid, please, for the love of Pete, figure out how to discern between a healthy leader or at least a general understanding of leadership styles, because this is such a good opportunity to look at leadership styles. Now, first is some context and some caveats. I want to admit that I don't know what was going on behind closed doors here, and without that knowledge, there is a little bit of like, whose side are you on? But, independent of those facts, Here's what I would offer, folks. Anytime you see leaders in front of you making a public appearance, one of the easiest things that you can see or you can look for is how are they aligned or are they not? Now, if there is major misalignments, leaders are usually wise enough not to go out into a public space. But if there is any degree of misalignment, leaders that have a reasonable relationship will usually be able to navigate that misalignment to a certain degree. Now, in this particular case, if you've at all paid attention to the news, you know this does not go well. You know that there's going to be some degree of misalignment, and so this episode is mainly about like how are these leaders going to navigate the misalignment. Now, the other thing I should note is when there are public-facing kind of report outs. One of the first things you can look for is whether or not some of the leaders try to posit a message that makes other leaders uncomfortable. Because if there's misalignment, you should not, as a leader, be saying something that is so grossly distorted from the truth that it provokes another leader to come in and go, I'm not going to stand by while you do this. Why is this really important? Well, most leaders, if it's at least generally in the vicinity of something that could, it's still being worked out, it's not quite there yet, will at least stomach and just kind of sit through mild misrepresentations. There should be no misrepresentations. I mean, a truly transformational, healthy leader is not going to misrepresent things wildly. But if it provokes a response out of another leader, go, hold on, this is not good. What that is essentially saying and should say to you and communicate to you as somebody watching this is that the person with more power in the room is trying to control a narrative that is so egregiously like misaligned and could steer future conversations and future possibilities of alignment so far off that the other leader says, I can't even stand by. You will not. I'm not saying Zelensky's consciously thinking this, but it's like you're not going to borrow power and borrow legitimacy by having me in the room silently condoning the message that you are giving. And the reason why I bring this up before we get to this video, because you're going to see it on this video, is we've already seen it with other world leaders that have had to step in and go, hold on a second, I'm not going to be a party to you, the narrative you're trying to spin right now. You're not going to take the entirety of my country and send a message with me in the room as though I'm about to high-five it. I mean, it's highly inappropriate already as leaders to try to borrow legitimacy and to do so in such an uncooperative way, in such an authoritarian way. That in of itself should be a red flag to anybody who's watching this, whether it's watching it from a political lens or just watching it and trying to understand people's leadership style. So hopefully that makes sense. We've got some misalignment. The reason that there's misalignment to begin with should be something pretty gross already. It's a war where it was not two people saber rattling. It was one invading the other twice. and still there is this sort of borrowing of legitimacy to make a message, and we're going to see that outright, and you'll kind of know my commentary, and then we'll go from there. So without further ado, okay, 5 minutes already, let's get to the video, and I'll interject as we go. So here we go.
4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
So there you go, right? There's the narrative, the spinning of the narrative. Now, if we didn't know there was already misalignment, we would basically check here and say, let's see if there's alignment. Let's see if Zelensky just goes, yeah, and they move on to the next point. But as we know, he does not. And let's check to see how this goes.
Ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied it, our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now the President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Before we get too far, two things. I mean, one, I want you to kind of notice the leadership qualities of what Zelensky is offering. Now, a less humble, more sort of aggressive authoritarian leader, a possible dictator-like leader, as he was coined to be, would not be so gracious in saying, there's a misalignment here, and I need to hear, like, help me understand. And then he's wise enough to say, like, I'm not even challenging just you. I'm, like, challenging the entirety of American policy that has preceded this moment. You're telling the American public and by proxy the world that something's going to happen. And I want to know what's actually different, because there are multiple people, not even just y'all. And God willing, right? You're so great. You might solve all of this, but help me understand what's different. This is indicative of essentially a leader who says, look, there's some sort of misalignment that I do need to litigate on camera to a certain degree, but I'm going to do so very respectfully. Now you see the second leader that we haven't heard from yet, or the third leader, I guess, Trump, and his first contribution is to try to correct a fact he does not know anything about. I'll give it a pass. I mean, leaders can sometimes go, wait, what? But still, just the fact that he inserted himself on something as though Zelensky does not understand the dates of, I don't know, a giant thing like war and invasions and stuff like that is already not a great sign of, like, why was that so important to inject yourself into? Because you want to absolve yourself of any responsibility. That's lovely. So, this is indeed a contentious moment, right? If you were within an organization and say, like, a group of leaders was coming up in front of you and one says, now hold on a second, the others are like, whoa, what are we talking about? We're not doing this. Like, you didn't tell us you were going to do that. It is a bit of a bold move. And again, what is that indicative of? That this leader thinks, like, this actually needs to be discussed, because every time I discuss this with you behind closed doors, it doesn't go well. Or let's more legitimately talk about this from, like, kind of a more better parallel than within an agency. Let's talk about, like, two agencies that are coming together trying to sell a product or trying to go through a merger or something like that. It's basically broken down so much of, like, you keep saying this thing, but you're not giving, like, any legitimate answer as to why this product would be better or why this merger is going to be good for the two countries and how it's going to be different than these kind of crossed wires that we've tried in the past. So, this is where I think there is some debate of, like, why would Zelensky do this on a public stage? You have to kind of believe and contextualize, and what's about to happen, I think, will also further this point, but you have to think in reverse. is like he's gotten to a point where he has to do this in public because otherwise there's going to be a delegitimization of his position, and he just needs to accept it at face value, which is a dangerous thing. Never mind, it's like a really inequitable way for leaders to kind of interact with one another, especially when one organization has way more power than the other organization. So again, we're on a little bit of dicey territory. He is being bold. Don't mishear me. This takes some bravery. And remember what I said at the beginning. We've seen other world leaders do this because there's something kind of gross about what Trump and Vance are tending to do around these world leaders. But again, let's see how this goes, because he's trying to be somewhat peaceful, and there's still plenty of room for Trump and Vance as their own leaders of their own organization to kind of pivot this in a reasonable way. And let's see how that goes.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What?
Again, I want to point out, this is a generally legitimate point. Like, think about it. Like, there's some sort of merger, there's some sort of like trying to make, a collaboration between two agencies, trying to make a better product. And he's basically saying, like, look, we did something literally like this before, and it did not turn out well. And you keep trying to convince me behind closed doors that it's going to be different. And now you're just publicly just pulling me in saying this product's going to be different, this merger is going to be different, whatever it is. Like, nah, for real, we're going to do this. What is going to be different? And again, if you immediately go back to the reality of the situation, to his point, there's literally people dying. Literally, the country could fall under. And when a company falls under, people don't die in that process. People are dying in this process. So notice I can make an analog here when lives aren't at risk, and it's still a possibly quite pertinent way to operate as a leader. Never mind when lives are at risk. So let's see, though. Again, it's a confrontation. It is, again, I think he's doing a pretty good job of being gentle and saying, like, look, Macron and Merkel, people who weren't even you, that was challenging. So let's talk about this. What's going to be different?
What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
So that is not a good response. I mean, if you think that's a powerful, good response in any context, oh my gosh, reevaluate how you think of leadership. I mean, think about, again, let's take this out of this situation. Not even war, right? No lives are at stake. Like, literal life or death lives are at stake. People's jobs are at stake. Let's take a merger, right? And he says, like, what's going to be different? I want my people to integrate into your organization, but I want it to be meaningful, right? I want it to work, because last time it went really poorly and a lot of my employees were screwed. Like, let's just say, like, that sort of situation. And the response, the public response, even if there's a little bit of, like, right, there's some disagreement behind closed doors, but because he's making this public, the immediate response from JD Vance is anger, aggression, and like, I'm trying to save your company. How dare you suggest, like, that you should be grateful I'm even talking merger with you, right? How dare you challenge or question this merger? And it's so out of proportion. This is like lack of humility 101. I mean, just not even wise enough to say like, I don't like that you're bringing up like small. I don't think this is in this situation. There are small disagreements. I don't like that you're bringing up smaller disagreements that we haven't quite figured out yet. So let's pivot a little bit. Or, let's say instead of like lives lost, it's like, I worry about the culture or something like that. He can't even stomach that. He's like, well, your company is about to die anyway. And oh, by the way, I hear you're hemorrhaging clients clients and or your workforce. You can't even get them in. And I'm talking about like a merger between companies that would be wildly inappropriate and indicative of poor leadership if that was the case. And this is not a company merger. This is a war where literal lives are at stake. And that's the response. I mean, it is just aggressive and lacking in any humility. Now, what we're about to see is Zelensky gets pulled into this and says like, whoa, what are you hearing about this? And this is where, if I, was thinking about more like a merger, it's an opportunity for the leader to say like, all right, I'm not going to be baited into a power struggle here. I said my piece, like what's going to be different? And you're like, your company's a piece of trash, just kind of go, all right, that's interesting. I'm going to pull back a little bit. So I think he, if I was thinking like merger, I think that would be like, no, I'm going to defend my people. Like, how dare you say like my people suck, basically, and that we're not worth anything to your organization. I don't want my employees that are already nervous about this merger to be hearing this from you. So I'm going to litigate this. I'm going to, engage in this power struggle with you in the moment. But I think it's ultimately a little bit unwise. The caveat, if we make it about reality again, is there's literal lives at stake. And J.D. Vance just called out like a military issue that maybe Putin knows. I don't know. But that, like, I don't know. I'm not a military expert. But that seems like slightly a stupid thing to do in this public sphere, simply because Zelensky's like, hey, what's going to be actually different? Because I'm a little bit worried about this. And he's like, by the way, your army is faltering in its numbers. Like, I'm going to give out possible trade secrets here in this moment. And so, part of me is like, I don't know, if I'm a world leader, I'm like, untrue, what the hell? Because I don't know, that could make more lives threatened by saying this in a highly public sphere. So I don't know, I'm a little bit on the fence about that. Maybe it's a necessary power struggle. Maybe somebody who's a military expert is like, nah, he needed to double down. But from like a general business leadership perspective, it's like, there's a part of me that wished he kind of pulled back and again didn't get sucked into that power struggle. So we'll see. Let's see how this goes. Oops.
I have been to.
Count one.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems? Bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very
You
strong.
will feel influenced.
So you see me laughing here. It's like, oh my God. So, Zelensky gets into the power struggle and they're like, all right, hold on. Let's pause the telescope out a little bit. And we haven't heard from the other leader, right? We haven't heard from the CEO yet. And so he's like, all right, outside of this power struggle, and let's go back to like the merger version of this. All right, so, you're calling me out and saying the culture's bad, right? Like my culture's bad and I should be grateful that you're even considering me for a merger, all right? And he gets a little bit defensive. He is thinking systemically in this moment and says, like, all right, I need to pivot. So if you want to make it about you, all right, let's do that. If I have, indeed, there's a culture issue going on here, right? Like in my region of the country, I'm having difficulty hiring new people. And it's because there's just like a greater cultural issue at hand, because say like the tech industry or whatever industry it is really struggling. And so the workforce is very demoralized, et cetera, et cetera. I would be careful, because if we're doing this, it's going to affect you eventually. Like whether or not we even do this merger, it's coming for you, right? Like this is not like a super isolated incident. And there's precedent to suggest that this is not a super isolated incident. So I would be careful, because it could be coming your way too. And again, it's got an air of confrontation to it. But, again, it's said in a way that's like, look, this is bigger than just me too. Like it can affect you. And what does the other leader, what does Trump do? Doubles down on J.D. Vance's methodology. How dare you suggest what this narrative is going to be? How dare you contradict the narrative that I'm trying to give, where we are strong and we have all the solutions and everything is going to be great? Retaliation, aggression, lack of humility, right out the gates, once again. And, this is such a sign that like, not only is the president, but the vice president, not only is the CEO, but some of the other executives are taking a same leadership style, very transactional, very authoritarian, marching orders. Like if this was a financial industry of how somebody engages in investments, okay, fine, right? Like maybe there's some latitude for that type of response to like, well, hold on, are we sure about that? But in my opinion, if you want to have any sense of morale amongst the people and any sense of like actual collaboration and safety amongst the people that you depend on to see what you might not be able to see. We cannot see everything in the United States. This company who's acquiring another company cannot see everything. They need input. And they are effectively not only squashing it, but saying, how dare you even say anything remotely negative? Regardless of any socio-political truth, historical truth to it, whatever, it doesn't matter. How dare you? And then he cannot resist but say, we're going to feel great over here. I mean, it's such a bad leadership decision. Like if your employees are watching this and they're not drinking the Kool-Aid into like authoritarianism is the best way to operate, like they literally had to work underneath this person, Trump and Vance, they would be sitting there going like, gosh, I hope I never have a disagreement with what the company's trying to do, because I have zero voice. I have zero ability to give anything that is outside a narrative of positivity. It's gone. It is destroyed in this moment. It is destroyed. And it's destroying for the other organization as well. It's like, wait, we're being acquired by these people? Like, oh my God, I had my troubles with the organization, but this sounds worse. This is going to be so much worse. And that's where the analogy falls apart, because that's what we're talking about, right? You're talking about like funding and those sorts of things, but it's just really not a good look in any way that you look at it, for it to be like, you're coming asking for help, and how dare you say that we're not the greatest, and that we're going to be the superpower for the rest of eternity. Like, how dare you threaten that narrative? And going back to my original point, what this essentially communicates is they are trying to spin a particular narrative, and they're trying to borrow legitimacy from the person in the room, independent of whatever's going on behind the scenes that you nor I get to witness. But that should be a red flag that there is kind of a perverse way that they are leading, that something can be so discrepant between what is behind closed doors versus what is external. And the minute there is any iota of challenge, they double down, they get aggressive, and they practice zero humility. This response would be merited if someone I don't think it would ever be merited, but the strength, or though strength is too positive a word these days, the sort of forcefulness, I think would only be indicated if the person was truly being petulant and truly saying like, y'all are the worst, your intentions are bad. And they say the leader's like, look, hey, you're getting a little bit aggressive here. Let's telescope out. And the person's still like, you suck. I don't like you. You're screwing us over and blah, blah, blah. Then that's when you get forceful and go, well, I'm not going to stand for this anymore, because you are writing your own narrative that is misaligning what our growing sense of the narrative is. We're trying to collaborate and you're not collaborating. Instead, it's the reverse. You have someone with less power saying, hey, hold on, I'm not going to be party to this. Can we please slow down and talk about this? And immediately the hammer comes down from the people who have the most power in the room already. It is not a position of strength. It is not a showing of strength. It is an abuse of power in any context, in any right. And even if you wanted to take a more hierarchical approach to leadership, you would do it more artfully than this. You would do it less aggressively than this. I mean, this is a failure in leadership style 101 unequivocally. And I think it's just important to name that. Now that I'm questioning, where are we going from here? I'm forgetting if I've got any further points, or maybe I'll end it here soon.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the
the
cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very
Again, so gross. Like, it doesn't need to be amplified even more of like, because you're being so ungrateful, not only will your company fail, you're risking the entire industry by your behavior right now. There's no math to that. There's zero math to that. The only math to it is that this person has been was put in a humbled position, and they can't handle it. They can't handle it. And so they're lashing out and saying, it's now going to be your fault. If you behave yourself, you can prevent World War III. If you behave yourself, your people can be safe. There's nothing that would signify that. There's just nothing. I mean, it's so incredible. I mean, taking it back into the legitimate context right now, when we're talking about war, that is beyond gross. There are ways to call out a country for saying like, hey, I need you to re-rig. I need you to step back. I need you, right? Whatever that is. But there's no context. I cannot imagine a situation, if I could be a fly on the wall of the conversations before this point, that would merit ever a response like this, ever, especially in a democracy and what the ideals and values of democracy are supposed to be. This is like brutal. This is not strength. This is aggression for aggression's sake and trying to control a narrative. I cannot find another interpretation for this. And if you're this far down the beaten path as a leader, you gotta cool it. You know, especially when you have a lot of power, you need to get out of the public sphere and cool your darn head off before you start saying things that are going to be really hard to come back from. The only reason, again, applying it to this particular situation, is you have a swath of the populace that loves it when this guy does this. So he's entitled and empowered to do it and keep doing it because there are no ramifications. But I can guarantee you, if you are a leader watching this and you're not the president of the United States without a giant constituents that just high-five you every time you badmouth or make somebody feel small, you will be screwed and cooked eventually as a CEO or as an executive or manager, even if you were to take this kind of approach. And I think if you're a leader, you probably already know this. There's literally no rationale for this in the modern day, and even back in the day, it was probably an abuse of power. People were just allowed to get away with these sorts of antics a little bit more, but that's just not how we work anymore. You can't bully people around. That's never a long-term solution. Whether it bites you in 5 years or 20 years or 50 years, it's going to come back to bite you. And history teaches us this too. Sorry, I keep interrupting. Here we go.
Disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far
country.
More than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A
entire
lot of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition.
Just to be super clear, he didn't say thank you, but he's been, again, very gracious and said, God willing, y'all can maybe do something, different this time. It's not just y'all. That sort of graciousness, so far, if they behave anything like this in other circumstances, they don't deserve that. Never mind a thank you. So just like a little bit of a fact check there is like literally he has conducted himself actually pretty well. And so this is just, it's just derailing. And this is where we might be ending soon because I don't know if it goes anywhere productive besides just making the same comments over and over again. But all right, let's see.
In October, offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, You think that if you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
you
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and your
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
Yes. What about
if you didn't have our military equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long.
So here, what you start to see is like the kind of an authoritarian transactional approach where he gets to be the rescuer, right? I've allowed this to go on, and it's good for people to see this. But you know what their narrative is like you have other countries that are petulant children. You have other organizations that are being acquired by us that are petulant children. If they have any pushback whatsoever in our acquisitions of them, if they have any asks that I don't personally like, they're being petulant children. And you know, it's a constant like, you need us. You're small and insignificant, and you would be nothing without us. Like let's take it outside of businesses. Let's go to like relationships. You know, you might not say like, oh, there's leadership in relationships. Well, you know, think of it leadership from the lens of like communication and equity or laterality. Like imagine someone in your relationship saying this to you because you're like, you know, say they come to you and you're like, you know, I feel like sometimes, you know, when we talk, you don't really listen as much. And I know we've hashed this out, and say you do it in front of some other friends, like, and they're doing it again, right? They're doing it to you, or they're doing it to someone else in the group, and they're like, oh, fine, you know, I've got to say this. Like, you know, we've been back and forth on this, but you're not, you know, you're kind of taking up all the space, and you're just kind of dictating reality, and it doesn't feel good. And then the person goes like, who are you to dare challenge me? This group would be nothing. You would have no friends if it wasn't for me. Right? Or in a marriage, like, you know, where would you be without me in this situation? You'd be out destitute. You'd be living in a shack somewhere if it wasn't for me. Like, it goes back to my point. Like, not even leadership, any relational stance, this would be glaringly unhealthy. And even if the other person was getting aggressive with you and saying you're bad and I don't like you, it's still not a merited response. It's still not you know, it wouldn't even be wise if you were in that friend group and then you retaliate. What would be wise in that situation? Go, look, you know, we've talked about this and I don't know where you're coming from with this. I feel like this is not the time or space for it, but like you don't need to be so aggressive in this moment, right? Like you wouldn't even retaliate and say like, how dare you, you're a piece of trash and you're nothing without me. There's no circumstance for that. There's none. And I mean, it's not even a leadership style anymore. Like that's just blatant narcissistic defense stuff. Like you questioning me and my worth and my ability to save and be the best and be perfect. Screw you, you're a piece of trash. I'm going to devalue you because I can't handle that. I can't handle that. It's such an important lesson that I wish people would take from. I mean, there's no better example. You see this out of this guy, Trump in particular. Vance, this is a little bit surprising on Vance's side. Like he tends to at least pull back a little bit. He tends to be a little bit smarter, a little bit less like, you know, defensive. But you know, you see this frequently, and it just baffles me how the American public has not kind of seen like not a great person, not a good leader. Like just 101. not a good leader. This is not leadership in any context. I think I made that point ad nauseum today. I just, mergers, friendships, marriages, gross, just absolutely gross behavior. Not even just not smart. It's just getting to a gross point. Never mind the legitimate context behind this. The legitimate, straight up what they're actually talking about context. This type of response is gross. Now, I don't know if there's anything else here. This might be the end of it, but I actually haven't watched this far. So let's see.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't with me.
For you what,
that wasn't with me. That was with a guy named...
So this is getting into, so then Trump tries to pull something out and contextualizes like, all you have to do is, agree to this one thing and it's all good, right? Like, if all it is a pay issue in the merger, just accept the pay and be done with it instead of dragging this out. It's just, it's probably a decontextualized fact. That's where I don't want to, because again, it's getting too much into the political unique situation. It's just from a leadership perspective, it's, I think his ego is starting to realize like, okay, now I need to have the higher ground, right? He retaliated emotionally first, this sort of lack of humility, this sort of aggressive, transactional, hierarchical, staunchly, like not healthily version of leadership. And now he's like, now I got to get the upper logistical hand too. And anything he says after this is already tainted, right? Like, if a leader was trying to make a legitimate point after what just preceded it, like this is the fire and brimstone version of it. Like I'll scorch earth and then I'll give you somewhere to stand afterward. It kind of gaslights people into being like, oh, okay, I guess maybe he's right. This is a legitimate point. I guess he was entitled to be a horrific human being in that moment, right? And that's just not, it's just gross. Again, this is where it takes it out of leadership. That's not being a reasonable human being. Whereas I think, say if an effective leader realizes that they kind of went off the rails, say, look, I need to pause. I need to pull back. I mean, I think we're getting a little bit harsh. I got way too heated. So what I want to pull back, and it sounds like we're just not at a point of agreement. I worry that you're not really as invested in this as you say you are, but it sounds like you're worried about that too. So we need to go talk about that more. And hey, public, sorry that you've seen this. We're going to come back. We're going to try to set up another report out soon so you have a better sense of where we're at. But we need to kind of reconvene. Instead, you just get the strong arming of like, I will dictate, I will run this narrative, and I will do anything I can. And remember, there's a power differential here. Zelensky, just like most other countries, don't have as much footing to continue this litigation. And so the Trump administration can just exhaust people, and they are controlling their own media anyway. That they can just keep pushing and strong-arming it until they get their way, until their narrative is complete. But again, from a leadership perspective, that should gross people out. That should be like, whoa, holy crap. Like, this dude's going to stiff-arm anybody, even when it's not called for, even when the situation is quite dire. And he will scorch earth to get his way. He will, because the narrative is what's most important. The outcome of him being great and him having all the solutions is what matters most. And that is on full display on such a horrific situation. If this comes out, even when negotiating around war, the fate of a country, that sort of pathology comes out, the pathology will come out pretty much everywhere. Everywhere. If the stakes are this high. When the stakes are low, you think it's going to be easier? I don't think so. So I hope this has been interesting. I'll turn this thing off. There we go. Again, I'm sure people will blast or dislike and see this as political, but I hope, you're hearing me talk from like a leadership lens of like, come on, y'all, come along to basic leadership ideology here. That is not a good example of leadership. And I hope kind of my language, if you're a leader, if you're not already intuiting this, maybe I've like operationalized what's going on, to be like, notice like when you get defensive, notice when conflict comes into play, how do you operate as a leader? This is such a starkly bad example of how not to operate as a leader. But I know there are some kind of milder versions of this where people will retaliate or they'll strong arm and those sorts of things. And there are consequences for that. Consequences that this administration currently does not seem to succumb to. But if you are in a business or an organization, or if we just make it in a relationship, this will catch up with you eventually. If you take this leadership style or you take any version of this kind of relational approach to your relationships or your organization, it's a guarantee it will catch up to you. It is not a long-standing plan, and it will get you into a pickle where you will have to double down and keep getting aggressive, because people will start to see like, I've got to be stronger to get my point across, which then with these kind of insecure, non-humble leaders, they just double down. They just get kind of entrenched in their aggressive stance, and it eventually falls apart. So let's see what this does. But 40 minutes. That's probably long enough. Nobody watches more than 5 minutes anyway, so it's already a risky episode to shoot. But as always, I thank you for listening and sticking along. I hope it's been interesting as much as it's a very different from what I normally do. And as always, stay curious.